You guys ready? Good morning. That is yours. Mine's over there on the table. Good morning. Thank you all for being here. My name is Fred Guzik. I'm Faculty Senate President. This event, the President's Forum, is hosted by Faculty Senate, and we are very pleased that you have come to enjoy the morning with us. In the room, I see a few of the Faculty Senate Leadership Council. Should always mention Candace, without whom nothing would get done, and Lolita, without whom we wouldn't remember what we did, and Don Crawford and Andy Bennett. I see. I'm looking for other people from the Leadership Council, and I'm coming up empty, which is fine. Again, thank you all for being here. President Schulz needs no introduction. I've been asked to introduce him, so here he is.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. You know, I've continued to be amazed that people actually show up for these. So anyway, that's, but on the other hand, if I walk in and there's 400 people in a room, you know that things aren't going so well. So anyway, for all the folks out there too that might be watching this on video, when questions come up, I'm going to do my best to repeat them. So even though for the folks in the room it may seem a little silly, that way we make sure we capture the entire question, or at least the general intent of the question that's on there. But before I start taking questions, a couple quick things. My congratulations to the campus community, and I had a chance to visit with the Faculty Senate on R1 status with the Carnegie classification. That's a really cool deal, but that's a campus-wide achievement. That's not, administrators, we like to stand up and put the quotes in there, but this is really a faculty achievement. It's in growing our research, growing our doctoral students, and it's kind of neat to be placed in that particular category. So my congratulations to campus as a whole, and I think hopefully, yes. Hopefully all of you and your units have a chance to celebrate that recognition. So with that, let's fire away.
So you're starting with questions. You don't have a preparatory speech beyond a paragraph. Okay. That's okay. From education, there is some confusion and limited roadway space behind King Hall for cars entering and leaving the parking lot to the north of Justin Hall. Are there any plans for better access?
Yeah, you know, the chances of me being able to answer this one are about zero. So I would say for any kind of, for any sort of questions concerning traffic flow on campus during constructions and all that, the website does a pretty good job of, on the right-hand side, there's a construction update. And we'll make sure, Jeff and several other people in the room, we'll make sure to address this particular question behind education, pretty specifically. So the answer is, I don't know, but as projects wind down, some of this will kind of clean up. As a reminder to campus, Mid-Campus Drive will be closed this summer. Because we're going to put that steam line right down the cooling line right down the middle, and it will not reopen to regular traffic. So that's going to go pedestrian friendly, very similar to what we did on the other place on campus on 17th Street, I think. And if any of you have gone out and just walked up and down there, it looks attractive. It's got nice light posts, you're not dodging cars and things like that. So I think this is a natural progression. That's all part of the campus master plan. I want to remind folks of that when they say, what in the heck are they thinking now? This is all part of that campus master plan, and I think it's going to continue to make campus more attractive. Oh. Okay. Yeah, we got a couple other questions. Yes, please.
For just a minute, because I have one from education that you can't answer.
Okay.
Ken Stafford has announced his intent to retire as Chief Information Officer this semester, yet no plans for replacing him have been announced. What is the status of his position? Will the position remain in the Provost's office, and will there be a search conducted to replace him?
Okay, there's a set of questions really focused around Ken Stafford's retirement, our plans for filling that position, kind of what the future looks like for that particular area. I think that pretty well captures that. We will do an internal search, not for a permanent person, but for an interim to serve in that particular position. Ken's retirement, we got the time to do that. Those announcements should be coming out to campus very, very soon on that. there was a lot of discussion about where it should be located, in the future. Should that position report directly to the president? Should it be in finance and administration? Lots of different things. One of the things, as I've talked to April and others on campus, that we really want to do is bring in a party from the outside to look at our entire IT infrastructure and start asking some questions. Could we look at Sprint or AT&T, coming onto campus and maybe taking some of those functions over that we currently do? I don't know what the answer to that should be. We've had a hard time staffing up the way we need to in the IT area, because those folks can kind of go anywhere. And we have former ITS folks living in Manhattan, still doing great things, but they're independent consultants. So it's a struggle to make sure that we can staff those areas adequately. So I think it's a great time when we have a transition in leadership to ask ourselves as a campus community, is it structured the way we want to? Are there services that we're doing that are appropriate? That type of thing. Now, this is not Kirk and April and some other person in a little closed room. We'll do the same way we've done things with human capital services, with marketing and communications. It'll be a campus-wide dialogue. So before we just launch a search to go out and find somebody, let's figure out what we want that future of that area to be on our campus, because it's like water, right? You walk into the restroom, you turn on the tap, and you expect water to come out. There's a lot of that IT stuff that supports directly research, our teaching missions, and all those sort of things. It's not a luxury add-on item. That's an integral part of campus. Let's spend some time asking ourselves what our expectations are. And then I would anticipate, sometime probably a year from now, January-ish, we would be ready to go out and say, okay, now we've identified what it looks like, what we need in the future. Then you can identify what that leader needs to be, and we can talk about where it needs to be placed organizationally on campus. So I want us to be thoughtful, use this as a great opportunity to do that, put some interim leadership in there to make sure we keep the lights on, so to speak, and then let's see where we can go from there. Clearly, campus will be involved and engaged in this, and I want to make sure I emphasize that, not just to the room, but the people online. This will be a campus conversation, but it's evolving, and we need to make sure we evolve along with it. Yeah, Jim.
Yes. Thank you, President Schulz, for fostering this dialogue. It's really appreciated, and I have the privilege of asking questions from the Arts and Science Caucus.
Okay.
And so this one's designed to test your memory about reciting the question asked.
Okay. I made an engineering summary, so yeah, go ahead.
It has recently become obvious that debt service and operational costs for the BRI are substantial, and that sponsored research overhead on the grants originating from BRI investigators fall significantly short of covering these costs. Operation of the BRI will continue to entail substantial investments from university funds, two sources of which have been identified to date. Both sources are already overcommitted. Funding these costs from SRO will mean less money will be available for startup packages, core facilities, grant matching funds, and other initiatives that are at the heart of the 2025 goals. Funding from general university coffers will mean less money will be available for faculty salary increases, faculty hires, building maintenance, and other initiatives that are also at the heart of 2025 goals. So what creative funding strategies can be developed so that the BRI does not continue to block progress toward our 2025 goals? Now, repeat.
So generally the question is, how are we going to handle paying for the debt service and the operational costs of the BRI while making sure that we have money to invest in the types of things, faculty, startup, and things that we need to do. That's the essence of the question. So a couple things. First, there was always a lot of rumors about what the BRI cost and what it was, how much it was out there. It consumed 100% of this or that. And I want to make sure I give Karen Berg a lot of credit for putting out, here's the money coming into the Office of Research, here's where it's going. And so I think what that did is it allowed us to destroy a few of the myths, and also see a little bit of really the order of magnitude of the problem. So here's essentially what it is. We have a $2.5 million a year obligation on the bond for the building, and it costs us roughly $4 million a year to keep the doors open and operate that as a research facility. So we have in my mind, we have a $6.5 million kind of problem. That's one. The second part of this was, there was always this idea that if we just did enough research there, enough sponsored research, that you could cover all those particular costs. So we also brought in a group from the outside that specializes in these types of laboratories. And the question was, what's a reasonable, sustainable funding model for something like this? Not where do you get the money, but is it realistic to say that if you did enough sponsored research that you could actually break even on at least the operational costs? And they came in and said nobody breaks even on the operational costs. That's not the way. It needs to be seen as a core laboratory facility, so there's always going to be some subsidy to keep it open. So you got those two things, I think, two good pieces of information. So we understand the order of magnitude of the problem. We also understand that it's unrealistic to just think, well, gee, if they do more research there, it's going to take care of everything. So the solutions. We have a grant from the state of Kansas, a global food systems grant that we're working on morphing. And one of the things that we're working with the Department of Commerce on, who administers that grant, is can we develop an economic model around the BRI, job creation, and things like this that would allow us to use those dollars to take care of the bonding part of it and get that anchor off of our neck, so that at least we would say, okay, we got the bonding taken care of by an alternative source than overhead or dollars that are general use funds that we could use for salaries and startups and things like that. So to me, that's kind of part one. We got to get that done. The other part is we need to figure out creative ways to have more faculty doing research in that, because then that takes that $4 million a year that we're spending on operational costs, and we can take that down to a much more modest number. Now the question is, what's a modest number, Kirk? Is that $1 million, $2 million, $3 million? I think that's still up in the air, but I think we can probably take that down by a couple $1 million. So if we can take, and I believe we can, with these strategies over the next 2 years, the BRI from a $6.5 million overhead funded operation to $2 million, in my mind that releases back up $4.5 million we have obligated, that then goes back into ensuring we have startup packages that are sufficient, that we can fund core facilities that our faculty and staff need, and that we have investment dollars as ideas come up, where sometimes somebody says, hey, for $100,000 we can probably get this, and we think we can go out and get other grant money, but we got to have a little bit to start with. So we've got to get to that position. Otherwise, you're right, it'll drain the lifeblood out of all of our discretionary research dollars. It'll hurt and impact faculty hiring and retention. So this is not an option to just keep kicking the can down the road. However, I do think the problem has been defined a little bit more. It's been more transparent. Now let's work together to find a way to do that. So that's a long question and a long answer, but we're working pretty hard on this, and I expect the campus is going to expect, 6 months from now, okay, what's the progress made, and have you narrowed this down and actually got a funding plan in place? And I think that's very realistic. By the fall, we need to have some pretty firm answers on how we're going to do this. Great question. Thank you. Yes, Aaron.
Kirk, we made great progress last year implementing a new series of professional titles for our non-tenure track colleagues. Of course, the resources to address the promotional increases have yet to be identified. So given that, if there are to be any targeted faculty enhancements coming out for the next fiscal year, would you support unit heads having the flexibility to award some of those targeted enhancements to our non-tenure track colleagues?
Okay, so let me make sure I try and repeat the question. We had an initiative go through campus combined over the last couple years that had a set of titles and a career ladder, if you will, for non-tenure track faculty. The question is, as we have these faculty enhancement awards that have been part of our budget for the last several years, would we be supportive of moving those to being able to have some discretion on where they're used. Is that a fair statement? Answer, Eric, yes. I think before we didn't necessarily have exactly what that career ladder might look like and things like this. And I know this has been a fairly, you've been very persistent in asking this each year. And I think in the College of Arts and Sciences, this is particularly a systemic issue. I think we've done those in faculty enhancement awards enough years now. They're in the budget for this next year. And I think some flexibility that the department heads and deans can have, I think should be part of that. Yeah, Lolita.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to Mid-Campus Drive and take this opportunity to alert everybody that it will be closed, a portion of it, from Plaquemine Road to Old Plaquemine Road, beginning Monday, February 15th.
Okay, so for all of you out there in TV land, we're going to close part of Mid-Campus Drive from really the kind of four corners right up to about leadership studies, roughly, will be closed starting Monday. So, you know, of course, everybody will hear that, and they'll still try and drive it like I will, and cut through the parking lot. But, and then will that reopen at some particular point, or that? Okay. Excellent. Yes?
I'm curious how you feel about having guns on campus.
I did bring it today. You know, my personal feeling on this is I just don't think it's a great idea. I don't think it belongs in an educational environment. Personally, the question was, what's my personal feelings about whether or not guns on campus should be allowed? So in my letter to campus, I think a few months ago, I've stated that I just don't believe personally that it's a good thing for us to have in educational institutions. If you talk to other presidents, whether it's Texas or Utah or Colorado, this is the one thing we pretty much all agree on. That being said, you know, my personal viewpoints notwithstanding, the Kansas law that has currently been passed says that we have to allow concealed carry as of July 1 of 17. And so whether I think it's a great idea or not, we have to be in a position to be ready to comply with the current Kansas law. And so Cindy Bontrager is leading a group that's got faculty senate representation and things that are looking at exactly what this means for campus. What does it mean to have concealed carry in the residence halls? What does it mean in our research laboratories to have concealed carry? And what about an accidental discharge and those types of things? So I want everybody to know that we've got to work on that part. The part about, well, Kirk, why are we more aggressive about getting it repealed or whatever? Our local representatives here in Manhattan have put a bill out, but if you look at the previous gun legislation, it was passed by huge majorities of the House and Senate, Democrats and Republicans. And so I think, unfortunately, we're going to have to live with it. And I'm concerned about the impact that has on our campus climate, on recruitment of faculty and students, and what it's going to mean. So one of the things I've been engaged with is some conversations with colleagues in other states. So with the president of Colorado State and the president of UC Boulder. And they're ahead of us, if you want to put it that way, on permissiveness on guns on campus. And both of them said, like we having here, lots of faculty discussion and dialogue, lots of concerns appropriately, but that neither president felt that that's really impacted their faculty recruitment, their student recruitment, and it kind of came and went and wasn't a major issue. I'm not saying that means that we should just not worry about it, but I would encourage you all to talk with your colleagues at some of these other schools and other states and see what they have to say. I know nobody will take my word for it, but I would encourage us to talk with folks like this. Utah has had pretty permissive gun legislation for a while, and so has Colorado. Texas is struggling with implementation and what this means and all those types of things now, and I've been in pretty constant communication with President Greg Fenves at UT Austin and about what types of things they're trying to do. And you know, all of us sit around, have a cocktail, and we're worried about it. All of us have state legislatures that have really pushed that this needs to be out there. And, you know, so we're all, how do we implement this in a way that keeps campus safe for faculty, staff, and students? That's where we are. Mary.
Hi, from an international viewpoint, this whole issue really impacts recruitment because our students come from countries where guns are not allowed. And when our Assistant Provost Marcelo Sabates is in the enrollment committee and he's really being looked for, how do we increase enrollment, and international students is where, you know, we see a lot of efforts to really increase that. And if there could be talking points from you saying what a concern this is that we can share with those students and their parents. Internationally, the parents have a huge say in where their, you know, 18, 19, 20-year-old students go internationally. And we're just very concerned this will impact us because then those students have the choice maybe to look at Europe, Australia, Canada instead of the U.S. So we are very concerned about that issue and would welcome talking points from our administration also saying that concern.
So just to summarize the comment for the camera, really it's an issue with recruitment of international students and the permissiveness of any kind of gun legislation. It's very different culturally to come to the U.S. and see this and really need some administrative talking points. I think let's work on those together on what makes sense, and I agree that's something that we really need to do. I do a lot, as many of you know, with colleagues in Australia, and I'm over there and they just think we're crazy. I mean, it's, and you know, interestingly, one of the people I interact with there a lot is a pretty active hunter. And so there they have gun clubs that the guns are kept locked up and they have a set of regulations on how to use it. And he just says, oh, you know, Americans, I just don't get it. So I do think this is something that's important for us to have a really well-defined set of what it means, what it doesn't mean. And it's certainly going to affect not just international students, but domestic students. When I go home to the East Coast in a different kind of political environment, and they're like, what are you guys doing in the Midwest? And so I think it's important for us to have that. And we'll need it, frankly, for faculty hiring and people like that, that as we're bringing prospective new colleagues in, they're going to want to know, what does this mean? And I think we need some talking points. So great comment. Thank you. What else? Andy.
This is a question from Professional Staff Affairs. Professional staff understand that we will need to wait for the data to be analyzed and a report drafted from Human Capital surrounding career ladders and salaries for the staff at the university. However, once the plan is presented to you, how will you ensure that forward progress is made on salaries for professional staff at the university?
Okay, so the question is, Human Capital Services largely is working on career ladders and salaries for professional staff, and how are we going to ensure once a report comes out that we actually do anything. I think that's generally there. I've seen some of the preliminary data and analysis that's coming out, and just in a general sense, we've been able to track pretty accurately faculty salaries and progress or lack thereof that we're making on that, but it's pretty easy to say, here's what full professors, associates, assistants in a region and so on make. That data is really, really out there and easy to get and see. We've struggled with staff positions because there's no general database of what these different folks make and what's appropriate to pay for the region and so on and so forth. So Human Capital Services, we have a group that's worked with Wichita State and KU and other Kansas universities that is helping us do this. And so what we should see in the next month or so is basically a report out that says, you know, we've got several key questions that we're going to have to be willing to answer as a campus community. There's a certain minimum wage, and I don't mean per hour, but a certain minimum wage using our compensation philosophy, and there's a gap between what some of our employees, lowest paid employees make and what that is, and there would be a number to say, hey, are you willing to put this in to get us there? The second part is, are we committed as a campus that every employee should be paid a living wage, which, you know, there's a definition out there of what that is, which is a larger number, but, you know, are we committed to wanting to do that? We've got to kind of answer those two questions first, and everybody may go, well, Kirk, that's obvious. But I want to make sure that if we choose to do those things, we say, here's what the bill is, and then we come back with a plan to pay that, everybody goes, wow, why are you using the money this way? This is not part of us working together. So the bottom line is we have a sense of what the numbers are going to look like, but they're finishing up the report. campus will see it. And we're also going to be ready to bring back some ideas on how we think we can accomplish paying or figuring out where those dollars are in a reasoned fashion that's not 10 years out. So I would expect that it's not just a report saying, here's what we got to find. It should be a report, here's what we got to find. And you'd ought to expect from us in a month to 6 weeks to be able to say, okay, here's our proposals or some ideas on how we can get there, and we want to work that with our governance groups. I mean, these are simple sounding questions that I think we've got to be comfortable deciding as a campus community, so that as we make decisions to move in that direction, if that's the direction we choose to go, people don't go, well, what's the administration doing? You know, this isn't really what I thought we needed to do. And we never have unanimity, but I think we can have a pretty strong consensus about where to go. So, thank you. Yes?
Eric Dover, General University Caucus Chair. This is a question from the General University Caucus. By 2050, racially and ethnically diverse students will be the majority. What specific strategies, fresh ideas do you have to begin embracing this demographic shift, and what will we look for in a diversity officer?
Okay, so the general question is, by the year 2050, or pick whatever year out that somebody would like to, clearly the demographics of what our student body is going to look like is going to have shifted away from just Caucasian to a much more multicultural student body. What are we going to do to get there, or to prepare campus? And secondly, what are we going to do about a chief diversity officer for the institution? I'm going to flip them around. Okay, the first one, the chief diversity officer of the institution. After a long time here, Dr. Gordon left, and Myra did some things extremely well, and like any leader, there were some things that probably we need to do differently or look at a little bit more broadly. So we were pleased that Zia Wiley out of the College of Ag has taken over that interim position, and she's doing a great job reaching out to groups across campus and trying to make sure that office, forget title and all that kind of stuff, that office needs to be seen on campus as really positive advocates for diversity. And I believe a place where you say, hey, we're doing a search for this, or we've got an issue over here and we need some help. I don't know who to go talk to. You got somebody to go talk to that says, hey, here's how we think we can help you get where you need to go as a unit, and so on and so forth. So I think, as I've talked to April about this, we feel pretty strongly we need to wait until the fall before launching any type of search for a new person there. Let's give Dr. Wiley a little time to kind of work with the campus community, so that we just don't rush out there to go find somebody and then say, gee, maybe we should have taken a little bit more time. So I think she's having a great calming influence and kind of pulling everybody into the fold. There's certainly interest on my part and the senior leadership part about where that position should be and what it should look like as we go out and search. I'm leaning very strongly that we should probably make it a vice president for diversity and inclusion. That may not be a big financial issue as much as its elevation of that functional area on campus up to the cabinet level. The other question you would have, we should ask ourselves is, it's one thing to, change something on a business card, but what does that mean in terms of what's in that office and what's in that area? Should we do the same things we've done with marketing and communications and with human capital services? And are there units on campus that in that type of an office ought to be restructured a little bit and functionally put in that area? And I don't mean moving people as much as that person will report to. That's much easier for us to figure out now than it is to bring in somebody and then they say, oh, gee, this office ought to report here. Then it looks like they're making a power grab as opposed to a systemic look at how that's structured. So that's a long answer to that, but I think for at least the second part of your question, that's what we're thinking. So I would not anticipate any type of search happening until the fall at the earliest. And it will be a national search. I mean, we'll want internal candidates, but I think we want to always sort of go out there and ask folks to compete nationally, and let's see what we need and what we're going to get. The broader question, which is really difficult, is how do you prepare for a continually changing student demographic? And every time I go to London or New York City, you just walk through the streets, you realize how Caucasian Kansas really feels and is when you're around a much more multicultural environment. And, I sit down at a restaurant in London, I don't go very often, but, you hear 4 languages being spoken, and you just, it's a reminder that, hey, that's the direction the world's going, and what are we doing to prepare for that? I think we have to continue to ask ourselves what types of things do we need as a university and in the community to make sure that a multicultural environment is welcomed, is supported, those types of things. And this is not we get together one afternoon and write this stuff down and it's done. It's a continual evolution. And I think universities, we need to lead this area in the state. I mean, KU and K-State got to be out in front about thinking about this, because the average person out there may go, well, I don't see why that's important. I've lived here 100 years and, it doesn't make any difference to me. We need to be the ones that are out in front pushing the state to make sure that this is a place that people want to come and want to go to. The second thing is, are there scholarship programs, and there are things that we need to do to make sure that we're not just simply taking the students who are interested, but that we're aggressively going out and saying, do we want to have a more diverse student body coming in? And if we do, are we putting the financial resources in place to ensure that students can come and be successful? I think most people would agree the worst thing is to have any student, any background, come in, accumulate debt, not graduate, and go back out in the workforce. We need to make sure we've got programs and systems in place to help students come, regardless of their background, and be successful and have a great opportunity after graduation. So, long answer again, but this is something we're thinking a lot about, but it needs to be a campus dialogue and discussion, and we can look at some of the things that have happened on other campuses and, oh, that didn't happen here, that's not an issue here. We have the same issues here. I think we just need to make sure that we're continuing to dialogue about them and look to where our future needs to be. Thank you. Great question. Oh, yes.
With this week's legislative proposal to remove two-year college faculty tenure, is there a trajectory that we ought to be aware of, or even being preemptive of, following on the same logic that they got rid of K through 12?
So the question really is, there's been some legislation proposed, at least, about removing tenure in the way it's structured in the community college system in Kansas. And the question is this simply a trajectory that you get the community colleges done, and then the next is let's go to the 4-year universities? To me, sometimes what we have to do with some of our elected officials and legislative colleagues is they're trying to solve one problem with a solution that doesn't really do anything for that. Sometimes people are out there and they'll go, well, Kirk, just think of how well you could manage resources if you didn't have all these tenured positions. You can't change them as much. I go, we have 5,500 employees. We've got 3,000 people that are not in tenure track positions. It doesn't, that's not the issue with doing things more effectively and efficiently. And people go, oh. And so what happens is I think sometimes people think, well, tenure is what we got to change so we can do something, and that's the wrong answer. As politics become more polarized in the country, not just Kansas, I think is more important than ever that tenure is an important thing that faculty need to have. If you do research or scholarship that somebody goes, well, I don't like that, we need to have that ability as a leading research university to say, hey, it doesn't make any difference. We need to be working in those areas. So the bottom line is I think we just have to continue to be passionate about why it's important. We have to point out the positive reasons for it. And then I think when somebody says, well, here's the reason that we should get rid of it, we got to attack those reasons sometimes because they're faulty as to why to get rid of tenure. Please.
The reason that's often given, was given for K through 12, is now given for community college, is that this should be a business model, and a business model means we ought to be able to fire someone. So it's not necessarily so much a matter of the size and efficiency. Right. It's a matter of a philosophical principle, actually, that no one deserves a job for life.
Yeah. So the follow-up question is, it's really a philosophical principle that tenure is outmoded, if you will, that nobody deserves a job for life. And well, you didn't mention this, but as I looked at some of the blog postings, it's really long. Well, you have these lazy people that get tenure and then go into retirement and don't do anything. And you know, that sort of deal is out there. I think you need and should expect the provost and president of the university, Sue Peterson, our director of government relations, to continue to fight that this is an important part of higher education. It's an important part of why we need to be here. We have ways to remove tenured faculty that are incompetent or not doing their jobs. And I'd like to tell people, I'd like to challenge some of these folks to say, show me another workforce that's compensated at this level, that almost everybody works 60 hours a week and weekends and answers emails, students, almost 24/7. I don't know of another group out there, not just at K-State, but institutionally, that works as hard as faculty and teachers do, particularly considering the compensation level. So I think we have to remind people, and you all need to remind people, yeah, I don't just leave in May and don't do anything for 3 months, right? You got this long vacation. And I'll go, well, you realize, people aren't paid during that time. Oh, I thought they were paid during that time. No, they're out doing scholarship. They're getting prepped for their classes. Sometimes they're going on trips and things that they need to blend that into their classroom. They're supervising graduate students. As a matter of fact, some of our faculty need to take a little of that time off. But that dialogue we need to continue to have out there. And I encourage you all to be aggressive with your colleagues, with our legislative officials on why this is important. And it's not good. All this attack on stuff is not good for our state. Pulling up Inside Higher Ed and saying something else about Kansas higher ed that's not positive is not good for any of us. It doesn't help our recruitment. And I think it can be very deleterious in the long run for Kansas as a state. Great question, though. Thank you. Yes, Fred.
Question from Human Ecology. It is our understanding that the Seton Hall renovation will use $3.75 million from educational building funds provided by the state for the next 25 years to pay the debt service for this project. This is approximately 50% of this fund. Given the deferred maintenance issues on campus, can you help us understand the reasoning behind the decision and plans for having funds available for building maintenance for the next 25 years?
So the general tenor of the question is that the funding that came for the renovation of Seton from the legislature went to the funds that are largely used by K-State for deferred maintenance. That's really what it comes down to. So how are we going to handle that? How are we going to manage it? Make sure that we still are doing deferred maintenance. So the bottom line is, when we went through the legislature this last year, we had several friends, true friends of K-State, that just simply decided a year ago, I'm going to put this project on my back and I'm going to push it through and we're going to get it funded. At the end of the day, they chose the best way to try and get that done was to use those EBF funds. We necessarily weren't sure that was the best way to get that funded. We would have certainly liked just a grant of or budget increase of $3.5 million in the state general fund, but you can't always get it exactly the way you want to. So when they did that, I think as I talked to Sue and April and others, we said, look, we had some people that really went out on a limb to make this happen. We don't want to go back and say, I appreciate your efforts, but we really want it out of this bucket instead of this one. If you do that, then they say, well, forget K-State next time. We need some help legislatively. So I just want to give some context to, it's easy to point and say, well, they should have done it differently. We have to work with our colleagues there to do it the way that they would like to. Our then goal is, well, if that's where it's going to have to be, is there ways as we move down the road that we can get those dollars into that fund bumped up some, so that we all still get the dollars we would expect for deferred maintenance, but on the other hand, recognizing there's some risk because maybe we can't get that done in a couple years, in which case you say, well, gee, now we have just cut our deferred maintenance budget back further when instead of going up, it needs to go down. So bottom line is we're going to continue to work on that. We need those deferred maintenance dollars. We're appreciative of our legislative colleagues. One of our alumni, Mark Hutton, in particular, really worked to make this project happen. So we're just going to have to work our magic in Topeka and see what we can do. But it's going to be a multi-year deal. I want to make that clear. It's not something you can flip a switch, go to Topeka, and they just do it right away. But we're getting things in the right place so that we can continue to do the deferred maintenance we need to. Just to put some things in perspectives, roughly, and Cindy's not here, but I think we get roughly 10 million, 11 million in that per year. I may be a little off on that. We should have something like $30 million a year coming in to do deferred maintenance, and that's even on the low end. So part of the challenge is we're already not getting nearly what we need for deferred maintenance, and that's why some of the projects like this one that we see out here with Memorial Stadium that we're able to fund with private dollars, that doesn't help necessarily deferred maintenance in other places, but this is a huge deferred maintenance burden that was on campus that now through private dollars and renovations, and we have an endowment set aside to help fund some of the deferred maintenance operations here. That's another way to at least take those dollars down. The second largest, or one of the other large deferred maintenance issues was the Seton complex. I mean, that thing was awful. And so what's going to happen is it doesn't mean that we build it and don't do any deferred maintenance, but we've taken two of the buildings that were really identified as problematic, or structures rather, and both have been able to do renovations in creative ways. So it's an elephant, right? We got to take a bite at it and keep biting at it. It's a concern. I have it, but we're also going to have to be flexible and see if we can't work with our colleagues in Topeka to make it whole again. Jim.
Yes. One more from one of our colleagues in the Arts and Science Caucus that there was a consensus for asking. And it's actually longer than the previous question.
The chair is down, so go ahead, Jim. Thank you.
So, and I'll read this verbatim.
That's fine.
Okay. For me, it's hard to square the circle of not having resources for infrastructure improvement and salary enhancement with, at the same time, having an abundance of resources for athletics and new construction. I fully appreciate the effort that has gone into raising the funds for these areas, but I am concerned that we do not seem to have a plan to secure inflows of resources for things that are deemed less fundable by big donors and the citizenry of Kansas. The problem for me is really an issue figuring out how to do what is right. That is, it seems to me to be a moral issue. How do we expect faculty and staff to continue to be happy and productive when this insurmountable problem of inequity between the areas of opulence and the areas of deprivation persists without a real remedy? So what is the remedy? How do we square this circle and get resources to both our crumbling infrastructure and to the faculty salaries in an effort to raise our salaries out of the bottom of the Big 12?
Okay, that's a long question, and it's partially philosophical and partially practical. So let me, the question, if I may, is we're funding athletics and several other areas that are building, fantastic facilities that are state-of-the-art. We've got other areas of campus that are starving, if you will. Why is it that we have large private dollars going to areas that already seem to be pretty well off and aren't supporting these other areas, and how in the long run does that affect faculty morale and us moving campus forward? Is that a reasonable?
Yes. And then the slight issue is that.
Yeah, no, it's not slight, but let me try and tackle a couple parts of that. We've been very successful as an institution in private fundraising over the last several years, and I would like to remind people that you see stuff going in athletics, and everybody always goes, well, gee, what about if that money just went to academics? Just think of what we could do. And our donors have continued to support academics more than they have athletics. And we have to keep reminding ourselves that we built the Veneer Family Football Complex. $20 million went to that. $40 million went to professorships, chairs, and scholarships. And so when we look at that, we say, gee, what if that money went there? The fact of the matter is, more of the money went to support academic types of endeavors than before. I just asked a couple this week for a $15 million gift to Kansas State University. One to name a department, do an endowed faculty deanship, and a third of it was for some athletics related things, and they've supported all those areas previously. So if we make an announcement and say, well, gee, we're doing this, everybody goes, oh man, and they forget about maybe the $10 million that's going into academic things. So the bottom line is I just want to remind folks that we are not like some other schools out there that have this massive number of people that support major gift athletics that care nothing about the academic enterprise. We're lucky. I have other presidents out there that have lots of people want to support football, don't care about the academics side. So that's one. Second thing is, as the states have disinvested, and I talked to my colleagues about this, and KU's actually dealing with this now to some extent as well, our donors tend to give in certain areas, and they've built their wealth in certain areas. And so, we have a lot of people who can support a great college of business building and endowed professorships and chairs and all that. So we're going to have, a couple colleges out there that have a pretty good resource base, frankly, to be able to do some things, and that's fine. You say, well, Kirk, what about the English building? Or, pick whatever you would like to. And if you don't have donors that want to support that, it's not how good I can sell it. There's just people go, that's not what I'm interested in doing. I worry about in the long run, if you extrapolate that out, at most public universities, that means that you have on these campuses a set of terrific facilities, whether it's athletics or business or engineering or whomever, on one end, and you've got people living in hovels practically on the opposite end because there's not private support to move those areas forward. The interesting thing is we have a set of donors out there that will have interest areas outside sometimes of where they made their wealth, and that want to support the campus community as a whole. And if you look, it's great that we've raised all this money, but the other important thing is we brought a lot more people to the table than were there before. And that's where we've got to do a better job of selling and talking about why something is important and why we need it for the campus community. And I apologize to drone on, but this is an important question. If you look at our colleagues in Lawrence and the benefit district, and it's created all kinds of angst with the legislature, and if you're not familiar with it, you simply go on any of the news media sites and you can get this download. But one of the cruxes of that was KU needs a new science building, a basic science building, not a research building. Teach organic chemistry, teach freshman biology, $100 million facility. And in my conversation with the chancellor, she said, we just don't have donors interested in doing it. The state's not interested in doing it because it's not really an economic development thing. It's just a basic need for campus. And so they've taken this approach to try and figure out a way to fund that and do that. I'm not saying their approach will work for K-State, but we're going to have to, in the next 4 to 5 years, figure out some creative ways to fund basic level academic facilities that are not sexy. They may not have great economic development types of things, but they're central to us being a comprehensive university. The final thing is that the most challenging thing we've had in the last 2 years that's affected our ability to do anything with salaries has been the tuition cap. So if you look and you just look at that old graph that I show when April and I kind of go around and do our little fall song and dance, is what are the two largest income streams coming into the university? Basically private philanthropy and tuition and fees dollars. And the state been flat or down. When you take one of those streams and you tie your hands, which is exactly what they did, as opposed to saying, if we're not going to give you money, we'll at least let you set that yourselves. Now they've said, we're not going to give you money and we're going to set that for you. Basically, we get enough money simply to help pay part of the utility bills each year. So we can squeeze on campus and then return it back to you and some of those things, but that is one of my major legislative priorities for next session when they do another 2-year budget. We've got to get that cap removed. Only at that particular point That means that you've got your tuition and fees income stream with some flexibility. You got private philanthropy with some flexibility. Only then are we going to be able to get back to addressing some of these salary issues. Otherwise, we're just squeezing the rock, and that's not really getting us where we need to go. So again, I apologize for the long answer. Nobody fell asleep, which is good. But I think, Jim, but it's a serious, not just financial, but it is a philosophical concern. If you just extrapolate out 10 years from now, you say there's going to be a set of buildings that are fantastic and everybody like to be in with modern facilities and great laboratories. And there's going to be a set of us that are putting tarps over desks and wondering how we can sort of be colleagues on the same campus. And I'm very concerned about that. And some of my other public university presidents across the state, across the country, as I talk to them, all of us are seeing the same thing. We're relying on private philanthropy, which means certain facilities are great, and we're not building those basic academic infrastructure things. We need to be comprehensive. So, if I talk about that some more, I can avoid answering another question. Yes, Andy.
This question is from me. The union renovation has introduced some challenges for taking job candidates to lunch and things. One of those being for different groups that want to have banquets and things while the union rooms are still there and we're dealing with the outside caterers. That has been a bumpy process at best. And we're running into issues where caterers may not be prepared for handling large banquets. I think you heard probably about the Scholarship Day banquet where they had 2 servers for several hundred people at a plated lunch, and it did not go well. What will be done to address this situation?
The question is, as the union goes through renovation, there's a lot of campus groups that use the union for candidates and other types of normal events that are catered. And now that the union doesn't have a catering service directly there, we use external folks. How is that going to continue to work? Is that largely? I don't have a good answer for that, Andy. So I'll make something up. So if I look at the Alumni Center here, that's the catering model they've used from the day they opened up. And I think what happens is the catering stuff becomes self-correcting at some particular point, because if you're going to do something now and that same caterer says, oh, we'll do it, you say, no, you're not going to, and you go to a different vendor. And I know what's happened here is if there's somebody who doesn't do the job, they just simply don't get the work because people don't want to do that. I do think if we look at the student union and look at the financials, we're the only student union previous to the renovation I'm aware of that had to be subsidized to make it work. And they don't have to be huge revenue generators, but you at least expect to say the student union with a bookstore and food service and all that, it ought to at least break even. And ours wasn't. And it was several $100,000 a year that had to be put into that. So part of the issue was it was convenient, but it was a broken model that didn't actually function from a financial point of view. So that's why when they're doing the renovations, the decision was made, let's go with external caterers. Let's not try and build out a kitchen that we got to fund and support and do all those types of things. The bottom line is if after 2 months or we continue to have these issues, we're going to have to find an alternative solution, whether that's working with somebody in town or whatever, to make sure that as we do events on campus, as we do appropriate things with the student union, we've got to have better service than that. That's the bottom line. So I need to hear about those types of things when they come up, and we'll make it work. But I do think the model they're proposing that we do elsewhere on campus has actually worked fairly well with the Foundation Alumni Association. There's no reason it shouldn't work equally well there when we get there. I think another issue, though, I didn't eat there very often, but that kind of Bluemont room where there was a lot of faculty candidates that were taken for lunch, where you just don't have the time to run off campus and do all those types of things. We've got to come up with some creative solutions in the long run to make sure that that's still available, especially for candidate interviews. I mean, I walked in there a couple times and I think, you know, you can tell, well, there's a math department, prospective faculty member, and philosophy and chemical engineering and all that kind of stuff. And I think there's a kind of neat part to eating on campus as a prospective candidate. And so we've got to make sure we figure out a long-term solution for that to work. So, thank you. The gentleman up here with the purple tie. Yes. Oh, yeah.
This is from education. As the use of Canvas to deliver online courses continues, who is responsible for ensuring that web pages, course materials, etc. are accessible? The use of videos in online courses is expanding, but it is likely that many are not closed captioned. Who should faculty members be contacting for assistance in complying with accessibility requirements?
Well, since April's not here, I would suggest people contact the provost's office. I think, so the question is really related to Canvas, and I'm going to say any issues related to that. If something's not working or access issues are an issue, who do you contact? The answer is I truly don't know. I would normally say, frankly, actually the office of the provost would be the first place to start. So we figured out what the issue actually was, and that could be then somebody in IT. It could be an IT type of issue. It could also be an instructional type of issue. So I would stick with that. I think that's the right place to start, would be April's office, and then go from there. I'm happy to make sure this question gets answered, though, appropriately. Fred, if you send it to us, I'll get you an answer specifically to make sure you can go back to this faculty member and say, here's where to go. Does anybody in here have other suggestions on that? I want to make sure that we get the best answer in the room. Yeah.
For accessibility, having course content be accessible for student needs, the accessibility, Student Access Center might be a good place to talk about that, about options.
The Student Access Center. Yep.
Andrea Blair.
Okay, so Andrea Blair, the Student Access Center, would be another place to suggest that people could start. This seems like one of those circular questions, though, that everybody could kind of say, well, I'm not sure it's me and it's somebody down the road. That's why I want to make sure that we get this actually answered with a definitive answer and not here's 6 people you could all go see, that as a faculty member you say, this is not helpful. I don't have a day to go around and see everybody. So we'll see if we can't get to the bottom of this. Thank you. We got probably time for one more. Then I'm headed home. Presidents don't work past 10 o'clock most of the time. So, well, let me wrap up by thanking all of you for being here. I appreciate everybody who's following along online. You know, one of the things that as I've been on different campuses, there's never complete agreement, nor will there ever be, between sort of the administration and faculty and staff. But I've campuses that at least have the ability to dialogue and disagree, but put issues out there in a civic way and be able to make sure these discussions are continuing. I think those are places where you see generally people kind of working together in the same direction. And I appreciate the fact that we have these open fora, that we have a chance to meet with the Faculty Senate Leadership Group on a monthly basis. And I thought most presidents did that. And I've talked to several others. They go, oh, we meet with them once a year. So I think that's the type of thing that is important for K-State to continue to do. And I'm committed to it. And I appreciate our Faculty Senate officers and University Support Staff Senate and Student Senate, because everybody's got too much to do. And to do this governance working together is really an important thing. So anyway, thank you all for being here. Appreciate it.